do have skills that make me a nightmare for people like you.
Thank you, Chair. I call the witness of Dallas Pickering.
Ms Pickering, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Just as we start, can I ask of you, in terms of the Inquiries Act 2013, under which the Royal Commission is functioning, do you solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence you will give before this Commission will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Thank you. Ms Thomas.
Thank you, Chair. Can you please tell us your full name?
Dallas Marie Pickering.
Thank you. If you could just move the microphone slightly closer to you. Thank you. You are currently employed as a senior practitioner social worker?
Yes, that's correct.
And you reside in Auckland?
Yes.
And you are a survivor of abuse in state care?
Yes, I am.
Can you please tell us why you have come here to speak today?
I believe that the story of children in care needs to be heard, and that the voice of children that have been through the state care over the period of time outlined needs to be heard. Yeah, thank you.
So we'll start with going through your evidence right at the beginning. When were you born? What year?
I was born in 1970. My mum was 16 at the time that she had me. She was living up here in Auckland, and she was encouraged to have me adopted out. And she went down to Rotorua and had me, and I was adopted out down in Rotorua.
So she left Auckland to have you down in Rotorua?
Yes. So no family knew that I was, existed. My birth father didn't know that I was around at the time, and so she went out on her own and had me down there.
So her family didn't know that she was pregnant?
No, she had really limited family support with her situation. My understanding now is that her mother had passed away a few years earlier, and she was the youngest of 3 siblings, and she was at home living with her father at the time.
You've mentioned your birth father.
Yes.
Didn't know at that point that you existed.
Mm-hmm.
What have you since come to know about your birth certificate and what was recorded on that with relation to your birth father?
Yep. So the previous speaker spoke about the adoption certificate, and on the adoption certificate I was named Selena Hewson. That was the name that my birth mother gave me. And on there it had information about my birth father, that he was of brown eyes and light olive complexion. There was no indication that he was Māori, but have later found out that he is Māori. And so I guess my whole identity, was lost in that process. So when I was adopted, my name was changed from Selena to what it is now, Dallas Pickering. Yeah.
And you've told us you were adopted and placed with a family in Rotorua.
Yeah.
And that adoption took place, the state social workers placed you with that family?
Yes, from my understanding, and I've had a look at some of the documents, there was a matching process. I was a Pākehā, I guess, looking child with blonde hair. On the birth certificate it said that my father was a mechanic, and my adopted father was a mechanic as well. So, and the family that I was placed with was a white European middle class family. So I guess in the state's eyes, they had matched me up with, I guess, the perfect family. Yeah.
And the family that you were placed with already had one child who was a few years older than yourself?
Yep, so they had an older boy who was 3 years older, and they wanted a girl. Also, the neighbour had just adopted a little girl, and so they thought it would, be great to have a little girl as well. Looking at the documents, the references in the documents showed that they had only known this family for 6 months, the adopted family, and the family had shifted up from Wellington. So, in looking at it now, there was minimal assessment done on the adopted family.
And so the people that provided references to the Social Welfare Department had actually only known your adoptive family for 6 months?
That's correct.
From your reading of your file and the documents, was there anything else noted in terms of the adoption placement or any concerns raised by the department before you were placed with them?
There was a statement from one of the social workers unsure whether that was, a good placement. There was also documentation about the house being cold and not fully furnished. And that's kind of all that was on the file.
So as an adult, you have sought and obtained your records in relation to your adoption and other records in relation to your life.
Yes.
At the time that you were adopted, as you were a young child, were you told that you were adopted?
I wasn't told until I was about 7 or 8 years of age, and at the time, and I guess I'll talk about it a bit later, that the social workers told the adopted parents to tell me that I was adopted. They didn't want to tell me that I was adopted, and so there was a bit of pressure on them to do that. Yeah.
In the documents that you have obtained, there are notes of concern about your care, and they start even at a time when you're just 5 months old.
Yes.
Where were those notes of concern from? Who made a note of concern?
Those notes of concern didn't actually come out until later on, but there were notes along the way from Plunkett, from doctors, the doctor's specialists, from the kindergarten. There was also concerns raised from neighbours and a friend of the family as well who had visited the family. But none of this was linked together, and it was all found out later on that there were concerns.
At what time did something get done about these concerns? How old were you then?
I was nearly 5 years of age, and I was hospitalised at the time, and I was in hospital for 6 weeks. I was malnourished. I had broken bones, and it was reported that although I was nearly 5 years of age, I was actually the size of a 12-month-old baby. I have photos which I'd like to give to the commissioners that show the reality of how I presented at hospital. I remember this being a really scary, dark time of being separated from my adopted parents. I mean, they were the only parents that I knew, or the only parents that I knew, and yeah. So,
I'd ask Madam Registrar to provide you with these, if you could show the witness those, just to confirm those 2 pages, the photos that you've talked about.
yes, they are.
Madam Registrar, I have copies for each of the commissioners. Now, I would ask for those photos to be produced as Exhibit 14. However, I am seeking a Section 15 order under the Inquiries Act in relation to those photos, given their personal nature.
Yes, they are photographs of a very personal kind. They are photographs of a very personal kind, and they seem to be of a sort that call for an order under Section 15(2) of the Inquiries Act forbidding publication of them because they are photographs of a personal nature. Does any council wish to make any submission regarding that, in particular if there is any objection to the Royal Commission undertaking this course? There isn't. I'll therefore make the order. The inquiry, having considered the matters it ought take into account under Section 15(2) of the Inquiries Act, makes an order forbidding publication of exhibit number 14.
Yes, Exhibit 14.
Produced on today's date, the 5th of November 2019, being photographs of a personal nature.
Thank you, sir. Dallas, can you just again tell us why it was that you really did want the commissioners to see those personal photographs?
I guess when often we talk about abuse, people in the public often just think about a child being hit, but actually I don't think that people actually see the reality of the care that has happened or not happened for children in New Zealand. That this does happen in New Zealand, and so that's the reason why that I think that people need to see the full extent of some of the experiences that the children of New Zealand have been through.
And those photos that the commissioners have were taken when you were in hospital, aged almost 5 years old.
Yes.
But you weighed the weight of what a 12-month baby would weigh.
Yes. I was labelled, I guess, in that I looked like a Biafran baby, that I was insidiously neglected, and
those words were used by the doctor to the senior social worker, stating that you had been insidiously neglected.
That's correct.
You've said you were in hospital for 6 weeks. What happened at the end of those 6 weeks?
I was placed back with my adopted family. And the reason that I understand is that the social welfare filed a complaint against my adopted parents, and the professionals involved all agreed that I should not go back to the care of my adopted parents. But on the day of the court case, and I don't remember this, but it was recorded that I was crying to go back to my adopted parents, and I guess that's, that they were the only parents I knew, and I was, screaming in the court and had to be removed. And so the judge decided that instead of removing me, that they would place me under a supervision order for 3 years. And I was placed back in the care of my adopted parents, and to have regular medical assessments, and for them to receive counselling. The counsellors at the time were the social workers, so they were considered the counsellors. And also the psychologist also recommended that I shouldn't be placed back into my adopted parents' care, but I was.
And within a few months of being placed back in your adoptive parents' care, were there some further complaints made by the school?
Yes, there were complaints made by the school, and this was the first school that I'd been to. And kind of from the time of August to December that year, there were complaints from the school about bruising that they'd seen on my body. There was stick marks on my back from being hit. I was treated differently from my adopted brother, and not allowed to wear shoes to school. Had really minimal lunches. Wasn't allowed to attend, this is the reports from the school, wasn't allowed to attend school trips, but my brother was. And so it was very clear that I was being treated differently from my adopted brother.
And as a result of a further complaint by the Social Welfare Department being made, were you then placed in a foster home?
Yes, I was then placed in a foster home in Taupo. What's really interesting is that I went to another school, so this is my second school within 3 months. I don't remember the home, I don't remember the family, I don't remember the school, and so I know that within that time I was in 2 foster care placements, and the first one, the caregivers were new caregivers, and they asked for me to be removed because of my behaviour. And yeah.
Okay, and we'll get into that in some more detail shortly. But just, you said within that time, so within an 18-month period, you're a 5-year-old child and you were placed into 2 different foster homes?
Yes, that's correct.
And at the end of that 18-month period, you were then put back in your adoptive family home?
Yes, I was placed back into my adopted family home.
In your brief, you've told us in there a few things about what it was like to live in that adoptive family home. Can you please take us through those headings that you've got there?
Sure. So the first one that I've got is that I was malnourished, and it was evident that I was different to the other family members. I wasn't allowed to eat with the family. I'd have a certain amount of time to eat, and then if I wasn't fast enough, I'd lose my food. Then I'd have to go to my room for the rest of the night. Sometimes food was thrown out to me if I wasn't fast enough to get it. I'd steal lunches at school, and I guess I was just, in that respect, trying to get my needs met. There were times where I survived by drinking hose water. There'll be times where I was left home alone for long periods of time. there was fruit that I'd eat, and neighbours would pass me food, sometimes under the hedge as well. In regards to the physical abuse that was ongoing, it just seemed that nothing I could do was right. I was hit with a jug cord, beaten with a broom. I remember being burnt with an iron. In regards to my, having sores all the time and these not being attended to, I became fearful and started bedwetting and soiled myself, and there was one occasion in particular where I had soiled, and the consequences of that was that the things that I did have were burnt by my adopted mother.
You've said you were isolated from the family life?
Yeah, I was isolated, so I wasn't able to play with my adopted mother, play at the neighbours. Her, I guess, opinion was that I was naughty, that I didn't deserve to be around other people. And it was, I was isolated. I had no one to talk to, no one to, converse with. And I could hear the neighbours' kids playing and having fun. And, there was a time where, that they had a pool, and, I had one swim in the pool, and because, I had an accident and hit my nose, that was it. That was the last time I could play in the pool. There was a swing out the back, and at the beginning I was allowed to play on the swing, but then I made grooves in the ground, so that was it. I was banned from playing, on the play equipment. But it always was put back that it was my fault.
You mentioned earlier that the school had commented that you weren't wearing shoes at school. Did you have shoes in your wardrobe that you could wear?
Yes, I did, but I wasn't allowed to wear them.
And why was that?
I think because I lost them, and so, but then I had others, but it was just a consequence, harsh punishment, on every level. I was, I guess, told that I was dirty, I was disgusting, and, at time I had to hand wash my own washing, for long periods of time. There was one report from a family friend that recorded that I was in the wash house kind of from 11 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon, and only allowed to come out to have some lunch and then back in the wash house doing my washing. So there's just so much that went on within that home.
And also in that home is the heading on your brief in relation to sexual abuse?
Yep, I was abused by a family member, sexually abused by a family member. This family member would come into my room often, and when I did speak about it, I was given a hiding. So
these matters that you've just talked to us about in relation to living in your home, these took place over roughly 2.5 years?
Yes, it happened over around about 2.5 years, and there were social workers visiting at the time. I don't remember social workers asking me how I was doing. I do remember the visiting social worker coming round and hearing some of the conversations, and the conversations were that, in particular with the adopted mother, that my behaviour was because I was taken off them at the beginning, and that it was the department's fault why my behaviour was bad, and that I was a constant liar and a thief, and that I bullied other children, which was true, in regards to the behaviours. But nothing was done about or asking me what was going on for me, so I had no voice.
And was it at around about this time that there was another complaint raised? So a neighbour complained to a social worker about what they were observing?
Yeah, there was a complaint from the files from the neighbours about my treatment, and I think there were complaints coming in from the school as well. But it took a while, to me that 2.5 years was hell. Yeah.
And as a result of a complaint being discussed with the social worker, did your parents then voluntarily place you under the care of the state?
Yes, they did. I remember the agreement being signed, and that was so that they didn't have to go back to court. So there's been no justice, no accountability for anything that happened. Yeah.
So at that time you were then placed in a family group home?
Yes, I was. Yep.
Can you just tell us a little bit about what is a family group home in comparison to a foster home?
A family group home is a big home with usually around about 8 bedrooms, and you've got 2 children in each room. It's supposed to only be a temporary placement, and children come and go, and children of all ages, criminal justice children, children that have been through abuse. So we all joined into this one home with 2 house parents.
So at the time that you were put into this family group home, were you around about 9 years old?
Yes, that's correct.
Can you tell us what happened to you within a few days of arriving at that home?
Within a few days, I was sexually abused by a 13-year-old boy, and we were found in a compromising situation under a bed. To me, because of what had happened in my adopted home, I thought it was normal, and we were caught by the foster parent. The foster parent was a respite carer on that weekend looking after us, and the week after I met with the social workers, and I actually disclosed about the family member in my adopted parents' home abusing me as well at the time, and that's, this just happens. I guess that was my thinking. Yeah. So you told the foster parent who was in charge of you at that home about what had just happened with this 13-year-old? Yes.
And you had also told the foster parent and the social worker about what had happened to you in your family home?
Yes, I did.
And as an adult, you've seen your entire file now, and you've seen a report that records those 2 disclosures?
Yes, there is. There's a report. Yeah.
What action, if any, was taken by the social workers after you disclosed that abuse?
No action was taken. And in fact, what happened is that I think about 9 months, I was actually placed back in the adopted family home again, even though that disclosure had happened. and that the family, because it was a voluntary agreement, they could have me back at any time. And at the time they were paying $13 maintenance and didn't want to pay it anymore. And the department put me back in that home where the abuse continued.
Dallas, if you just look at paragraph 12 of your statement there, did you want to read that paragraph?
Yeah. In it, I did not have anyone that I could talk to, and nobody asked how I was, and I had no trust towards adults anyway, because I wasn't believed. None of the trauma that I went through was addressed. I was actually labelled in the files as a disturbed child, that I was naughty, and that I had a chip on my shoulder. Wouldn't you? Have one too? Yeah.
Talking about being placed in foster homes and family group homes, do you know how many times you were shifted around the various homes when you were a child or a teenager?
12 times. By the age of 15, I was shifted. And in regards to primary schools, I think there was 11 moves in primary schools in that time, and shifted from foster homes to family group homes, and then also back with my adopted parents 4 times.
So throughout that period you were placed in either foster homes, family group homes, and intermittently be placed back with your adoptive family?
Yes.
Do you have any memories of being placed in a foster home that was a good environment?
Yes, probably the second one, where I was placed in a home in Murupara. It was they had their own, I think 3 children of their own, and it was on a farm. And I remember some really good experiences there, going to, I guess, farm shows and having a pet lamb and things like that. But unfortunately that didn't last long, because it was the next time I was placed back with my adopted family. And then there was another foster home that actually I was there for 18 months, and that was when I was around 11, 12. They were an amazing family, and I was, as I said, I was only there for about 18 months. But what made it really, I guess, a new experience for me is that I was included in the family. They included me in family outings or holidays. I wasn't just in other foster homes. When the families went on holiday, I was placed in respite care because the family wanted to have a break, or but with this family I was taken on the holidays with them. Birthdays and Christmases were a positive experience, and I think for me, this particular Christmas when I was with this family was probably the best Christmas that I had, in regards to understanding what Christmases are all about, because Christmases and birthdays in my adopted family I was left out of. And so, this was a really special time for me.
I think you've said you even, in terms of photographs in this family, was another thing.
Yeah, I mean, when it came to family photos, I was included in the family photos as well and not put aside as the foster child. So that was really important, to not feel like I was outside of the family. Yeah.
So that was a positive environment, but what happened to you in that family?
So, I mean, I wasn't the most best behaved child. I had a lot of trauma and a lot of, behaviours. The foster parent was asking for support, for some counselling. I remember going to one counselling session, and because I didn't engage in that counselling session, that was it. That was the last counselling session that I went to. And I guess we all know now that, even back then, that takes a while to build up rapport and trust with a counsellor. So that was, I guess, a prime opportunity or a chance to get some counselling support. That never happened. So it got to a point where I had an explosion, and so the foster parent asked for a month's break, and it was, and I think we both needed a break as well. So yeah, I was placed in a family group home, and I guess because I also had been rejected, or pushed away so many times, I guess in my inner thoughts I felt I was being rejected again, and so I was saying that I didn't want to go back, but deep down I did. The foster parent was saying that she wanted me back, but that was closed down, and I was not returned to this foster home. I ended up staying in the family group home, and I think the really horrible thing was that I was told that I wasn't allowed any more contact at all with that foster parent. So, this relationship that I'd built, a fairly good relationship over that period of time, had broken down. And it wasn't encouraged to have that resolved or have any issues resolved. And I even had to, because it was on the way to school, I had to walk past her house every day. And I wasn't allowed to, say hello. She was given the same direction and told that I would not be coming back to her care. Many years later, we've talked about it, and, for her, it broke her heart, and I guess for me as well, in regards to attachment. It was an opportunity for me to have a safe and secure home, and that was taken away by decisions made by the social workers, because they felt it was in my best interest not to go back, and it's recorded in the files as well.
So at that time in your life, what was your feeling about your situation and where things were heading for you?
I didn't know what was going to happen to me, because it was a closed adoption, and I didn't understand that back then. I couldn't go back to my birth family. There was no opportunity for that, for my birth family. And one of the things, I've met my birth father, and he said to me that he wasn't given a choice whether he could be a parent or not. And it took away my identity, and I don't know whether my birth family could have had me back then, but they were never given a chance or given a choice to have that opportunity. And so in regards to my future, I didn't know what it would be. I actually felt, to be honest, like nobody's child. That's how it felt, that I was nobody's child. Because I couldn't go back to my adopted family. And the foster homes weren't working out.
So where did you end up then at that point?
I ended up staying in the family homes until I went to actually one other foster home, and in my thinking, before I read the files, I thought I was there for 18 months, but when I look at the files, it was only a month. So that was, I guess, my thinking around the time frame around that and what was happening in that home. That placement only lasted a month. Yeah. But I ended up staying in the family group homes, which were supposed to be temporary placement until the age of 16.
So they were supposed to be a temporary placement, but you were there for a number of years.
I was there for probably another 2.5, 3 years.
Now, paragraph 20 of your statement, you talk about the caregiver at this family group home.
Yep, there were 2 caregivers in the family group home, and the first one was firm but fair, and I kind of knew my place there in a good way. There were some really good boundaries, but the next caregiver that came into that family group home, she ruled by fear, she ruled by violence. There was a segregation between the children in care and her family. In fact, there was a separate living area, so the adults had their living area, and her family had their living area, and we had our living area. And, it's supposed to be a family group home. There wasn't family. It didn't feel like family. We knew that we weren't family. We knew that that wasn't a home. And I guess for me, there was only 2 of us that were long-term care, and as you can imagine, there were children coming in and out, so I could wake up in the morning and have a new child in the room next to me. I didn't know how they were going to respond. I never had safety around my possessions. Things were taken, broken, stolen, so nothing was safe, nothing was mine. I didn't feel safe in this home. There was little supervision in this home as well. Sexual abuse became the norm from older children. And I didn't have any boundaries. And there were also times where the caregiver, if you had pissed the caregiver off, you'd have the silent treatment for days. So I couldn't get my needs met. So if I wanted something, I knew I couldn't approach you because, don't talk to me until I'm over your whatever you've done. So, I couldn't get my basic needs met. Yeah.
You've said there was no supervision, so you were not supervised. What about supervision in terms of the caregiver and the running of the home? One of the things that I noticed when I looked at my files is that there was hardly anything written in my files in that time from social workers from that home, and particularly around that caregiver. And I kind of felt like I was just in a state of sitting in care. Every 6 months I'd have a review meeting, and it was a long time between those 6 months of not seeing social workers or knowing what was going to happen. And so there was a lack of social work support as well around that time. So, and there's no way that I would have told the social worker what was happening because I didn't trust the social workers, yeah. I guess in regards to the supervision, I didn't have boundaries, and I was told that I could smoke as long as I brought my own cigarettes. I started using drugs.
And, there'd be times where I'd go roaming and meet up with older men to have sex with them. And so, I was at risk there in that situation as well.
If we turn to paragraph 23, you've talked in that paragraph about this caregiver's brother, so the caregiver you've just described. What happened in relation to the caregiver's brother?
At the time, because usually around Christmas, New Year's, or any holiday period, I'd either be kind of shipped off to another family home because all the other homes would close down, or I'd stay. And in this particular time, this was the family home that was open. There was only me and another young lady in the home at the time. And the caregiver had gone out, and on New Year's Day, her brother came over, and he was drunk. He came into my bedroom. I remember it quite clearly because I didn't realise it at the time, but he had a bowl of cannabis in his hand, and that was put on the bed. He asked me if he could have sex with me, and he raped me. I couldn't say no, even if I tried. I was too scared. And there's no way that I told the caregiver that happened. So I guess, this place was supposed to be a place of safety, but it was the complete opposite.
And then a year on from that event, on New Year's Eve, the following year, can you tell us what happened then?
So that year, I went to another family home with respite caregivers, and I was the only one left in the home. The rest of the kids had gone back to their families for the holidays. I was brought up to Auckland to a family get-together up here, and on that evening the caregiver got drunk and he abused me. I told his wife because she came into the room, and she just told me because I was sleeping on the couch and him and his wife were on mattresses on the floor, and I was told to go to a different side of the room, and so I did. I went and slept on the floor that night, away from them.
So you'd, at that time, nowhere felt safe for you?
No.
I'd like to talk to you about transitioning out of care. How did that work, and how old were you?
At the time, the transition out of care, the age was 16. And earlier that year, I was, I guess, either told to leave school or be kicked out of school, because I had actually assaulted 3 children, or 3 people at school. And so I chose to leave school, and I got a job in a sewing factory. I don't even know how I got that. Anyway, it was through a youth program, so I was supported to go into a youth program, and then got a job at a sewing factory. And then I was given a room at the YMCA at the time, and I left care. I think it was practically on my 16th birthday, and with the blankets and the clothes that I had, and went to live in this residence. I soon lost my job soon afterwards because I bullied someone at the job, and then a few months later I became pregnant and had my son about a bit later. Yeah.
And what supports, if any, did you have at that time in terms of raising your son?
I had friends, and I didn't have any family support, and I guess I had some options. I could have an abortion, which I didn't agree with. I could have my child adopted out, and I guess with my own experience, it was like a definite no way. And so I chose to have my child. The department were considering taking my child off me, but I fought that, and I said, no, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do the best that I can with my children, with my son. And then a few years later, I did have another child as well.
At this time in your life, at around this time, who else entered your life at that stage?
When I was pregnant with my son, my birth mother contacted the department, and she wanted to know me. Well, she actually didn't want to know me, but when she heard of what I'd been through, she wanted to meet with me, and I met her soon after I had my child. I just really feel for my birth mother and what she went through, and I know that it's been a continued struggle, and we've struggled in our relationship.
Can you tell us about your birth father and how you found out that you were Māori?
I found out when I met him. I met him when I was about 22 years of age, and he let me know then that he was Māori. His father is Māori, and I guess in a sense I kind of knew in myself. It was just something that it's a sense of who you are, and I kind of felt that and knew that as I was growing up. Not sure how I knew that, but you just know. He wasn't connected strongly to his Māori side of the family, but to me that was really important. We did spend some time together then, and then we lost contact, but over the last 10 years we've had really good relationship, and things are going really well there, and I have contact with his family.
In terms of parenting your own children, how was that?
I know that I did the best that I could with the knowledge that I had, but I also know that I made some huge mistakes, and a lot of that is because of the lack of role modelling that I had growing up. I brought both my children up on my own. There are some real challenges. The past doesn't go away. It impacts on every relationship, and it impacted on my children's relationship. And in some sense, there's still some of those struggles today. But my children too are both doing really well. They've got children of their own now, and so they're amazing, my children, and a real blessing.
Can you tell us about what changes you made in your life and where you went to after having your children?
Yeah, I think there were some critical things that were happening for me when I made some changes. I had my daughter, and I guess the past was catching up with me. Was using drugs quite a bit. Had postnatal depression, and I knew I had to make some changes in my life, otherwise my children would end up in the same system that I did. And one of the key things is that I started going to a church and made some changes. Later on I studied and completed a Bachelor of Social Work and also a postgrad diploma, and I've been working in the social work field now for the last 20 years, supporting families. And yeah.
I'd like to ask you about the confidential listening and assistance service. How did you find participating in that?
I felt like I had a voice, but I also felt, and I guess it's the wondering around this process too. There's so many voices, and, will the survivor's voice be lost in all of this? And yeah, I also went through the Ministry of Social Development, around my adoption and, this as well. So I've been through both processes and found them both really difficult. Just sharing and the real shame about, I never wanted to tell anybody that I'd been through care. One of the questions that is a normal question that people ask you is, where are you from, who are your family? And I really struggled to answer that. So this gave me a bit of a voice around that, to be able to address some of that. But yeah, but it's not easy. Yeah.
So by having access to your files to be able to read that, you had gained a bit more understanding of what had happened in your early childhood?
Yeah, it did. And I guess getting the counselling and support that I actually needed, through that process. Well, I actually sought that out for myself before this process as well, and I don't think that I would have been able to do that without that. And I guess getting an understanding that actually you can't just forgive and move on, that actually you do have to process it and work through it, and because this impacted on all relationships, and you just have to go through that process. You can't just leave it there and let it sit. And it's an ongoing journey. Yeah.
And as part of that, did you go through the claims process?
Yes, I did go through the claims process.
How did you find that?
I actually found that there was one thing that really stood out to me that really distressed me. Nobody's been held to account, and I asked MSD at the time, would these caregivers be held to account, considering that they're your employees? You've employed these caregivers, and they said that nobody will be held to account. That shocked me, and I'm thinking of the many other children that there's been no justice for, and these caregivers, particularly the family home caregivers that were held, that were employed by the department, have not been held to account, and still to this day are not. Yeah. So that was really difficult to hear that. Yes, I was offered compensation, and I was given an apology, and I was advised to accept the apology and take the offer, because that was all that would happen.
And how did you feel about that aspect of that process, the advice that you received?
I felt that it wasn't valued. What I went through wasn't valued for what it was. Yeah, I guess that's how I can put that. Yeah. I guess for me too is that the enormity of the institution, of the department, was a big thing. It was like, to fight the organisation, or an organisation that's a government department, you can't do it on your own. And it's huge, and the enormity of that, it doesn't give you a choice around that. And there's no structure within New Zealand to be able to deal with that.
If we turn now to the paragraphs in your brief under the heading Future, what would you like to tell the Commissioners about your hopes for the future in terms of parenting, caregivers, social workers, those types of things?
I could be here forever. No, anyway. I guess just working in the field, but what happened to me shouldn't happen to children today, especially with what we know around experiences of children, around trauma, around attachment. I know of cases now where decisions are made out of people being reactive and not responsive, and that transitions are being made for children that are not in the child's best interest, but it's about the department's timeframes or the social worker's timeframes, but actually not about the child. I believe that intergenerational abuse needs to be addressed within, and looking at wraparound services for families within the home, and not having the removal of children. I know this is not my experience, with adoption, but with children that are in homes where there's generational abuse, that actually, teaching these children how to parent because they haven't had that, or they've been through their own trauma. Accountability for caregivers, I think that's huge. And in regards to that, training around trauma, and that the focus needs to be on the child and the trauma, not the child's behaviour. Many children, and I still hear it now, is that children in care are labelled as naughty, but actually it's the trauma that's speaking, and it's not the behaviour. It's the trauma coming through the behaviour. That caregivers need mandatory training before they take on children in care. And also working with the caregivers, because when something happens within the home, and from my own experience, is that caregivers don't actually want the children to be moved. They actually want the support in order to keep that placement secure. And I think if that would have happened, the outcome for me a bit later on may have been better. And often we move children without putting the right supports in place for the caregivers and the children. Social workers, there was one social worker that I remember that did build a relationship with me. But other than that, how can you build a relationship with a child when you visit them every 8 weeks? How can you build that rapport, and how can that child feel confident to be able to share what's really going on for them when you only visit every 8 weeks? that's just not going to, I mean, these children have enough problems trusting as it is. And for many, and I've seen it, when they've done the 8-week visits, it's a tick box. I've done my visit. Okay, when's the next one? And I guess that comes down to funding and, resources and things like that. Yeah.
Would you like to, just before we conclude, would you like to read paragraphs 38 and 39 of your brief to us, and then you wanted to finish with a quote that you've got with you today?
I guess, the lifelong impact that this abuse has had on me, I'll carry, for a lifetime, and it's continuous, and it's something that I need to continue to address. And, I've got really good support around me now, but there's a lot of people that haven't. But, the stigma of being a foster child, or the stigma of abuse, can't be shaken off. And, and I've come just to share my story with the Commission to help other children and not to have a childhood like mine. And I guess as a nation, our children, our tamariki are crying out for something to change, because the change isn't happening, and children are still being put in these situations that are unsafe, and are not getting the support. And then we're dealing with, adult trauma, and then parenting, the adults that become parents, and then it continues as a generational. And there's layers of trauma around that, which I see in the work where I'm working. And I guess just encouraging us to be responsive rather than reactive to situations of care. I guess the quote I want to finish with, which I think is by Dr. Bruce Perry, is that you can take the child out of the trauma, but it takes generations to take the trauma out of a child. And child trauma is complex, and it turns into adult trauma and then parental trauma. So I think, that's kind of my end statement. Yeah.
Thank you, Dallas. Thank you for your evidence today. Chair, I have not had any notice of any questions from Council, so I'll hand over to you.
Thank you. I take it from that, Council, that there's no wish for any of you to ask Mr. Stone. There's just a slight procedural problem. Two Council have intimated they wish to ask a question, but there's a process which you usually go through. I think the way in which it can perhaps be resolved is for my colleagues and I now to take the afternoon adjournment, and if you, Mr. Stone, and you, Ms. Thomas, can speak about this with your counterparts, and we'll approach the matter afresh in 15 minutes' time. Madam Registrar, would you please adjourn the sitting? Thank you. The Commissioners have been assured that the protocol in relation to questioning of witnesses has been followed. There are obvious matters of sensitivity that need attention. We're satisfied that it is appropriate for permission to be granted in the following terms. Permission is granted to Mr. Stone to ask questions of this witness regarding Māori identity, and permission is also granted to Mrs. Dyer Kidd to ask questions regarding the way in which a social worker can create a relationship with a child. As you are in position, Mr. Stone, I'll invite you to go first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Te tuatahi e te tuahine tēnā koe, ka tukunu toku aroha, toku mihi kaha kia koe, kei roto tōringa, hei manaki, hei arahi, hei whakakaha ia koe. In English, that simply means that I acknowledge everything that you've said today and the kaha and strength that it would have taken to have said it, and I give you nothing but my support and aroha to you today. Did you have the benefit of listening to the previous witness, Dr. House?
Yes, I did. Yes.
Well, that's good, because everything that she spoke about, you're the living embodiment of everything that she was speaking about. You pretty much tick all those boxes that she was referring to, the severance of the whakapapa, the fairer babies being the preferred babies, and all that sort of stuff. And the last question that I asked of the previous witness was that there must be people out there who don't know who they are. Mm-hmm. And you touched on that, but I asked the question of you again. In light of everything that you've said, do you know who you are?
In light of what you said, I guess it has to go back a couple of generations for me, because my father's father was adopted. So if you go back earlier, his mother was European and his father was Māori. And when he was born, he was adopted to a Pākehā family as well. And that's where we haven't been able to link back to our iwi, or to know, all that we know is that he was born in Te Poi, and that, he was removed from his mother and placed with a Pākehā family as well. So we still, in regards to that, still don't have strong links back to our whakapapa, to our marae, to our hapu, to our iwi. And that's something that it's a real blockage, because we can't, we're struggling to find those links.
One of my other questions that I was going to ask you was whether the prejudice in terms of severing your whakapapa link was intergenerational. And I was going to ask that in reference to your children and to your mokopuna, but it appears that you've suffered that as well, because you're a second generation that's been disconnected through your whakapapa. Because was it your grandfather that was also adopted out?
Yes. Yeah, it wasn't my father, it was my grandfather. But yes, it impacted on my father's generation as well, because I found out later on that he actually had some time in foster care as well. So we're going back now 3-4 generations of the impact. And I think that, in relation to the previous speaker, I agree that if I had been identified as Māori back then, that maybe I would not have been put back into this adopted family so many times. And I always kind of reflect on that and think, would decisions have been made differently because of that?
And in your evidence you spoke about being ashamed of being a foster child. Do you feel a level of whakamau or shame in terms of not knowing your identity?
Absolutely. I don't get to know some of the stories, the history, the values and beliefs that, could have come through those generations. I have, a good relationship with my dad, but I'm still, in a sense, that relationship is still forming, and so I'm still on the outer, and yet I think that if I had grown up within the family, that would have been different, because that history, that story, those unspoken things, is that becomes who you are, and that was disjointed for me in many ways through being a child in care and a foster child.
Ms Pickering, thank you.
Thank you.
Those are my questions.
Mrs. Dyer-Kidd.
Tēnā koe, Ms Pickering. My name is Fiona Guy-Kidd and I represent the General Synod Te Hoinota Whānui of the Anglican Church of Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia. One of the focuses of this commission is how to prevent abuse and care in the future. And you're a senior social worker. Do you work with children regularly?
Yes, I do. I guess I don't want to disclose in this forum where I work, but yes, I do.
And you've told us that from your own experiences as a child, you said you couldn't trust the social workers, and that there was only one social worker with whom you were able to build a relationship. Mm-hmm. From your experiences and your current work, can you tell us how does a social worker build a relationship with a child? What's necessary to do that?
I guess it is about that connection, finding a point of connection with that child, finding out who they are, where they're from, coming down to their level, spending time with them, is really, really important. You can't build a relationship if you don't see them, every 8 weeks. You can't build that relationship or rapport with them. And that's not just done through talking. There's other avenues that this could be done through play, through interaction, through, activities, and also actually helping them with the connection with whānau as well. That's going to help them, open up and actually valuing their family, even though there's stuff that's happened in their whānau, valuing their family and those family relationships as well.
Related to that, you spoke of your own brief experience of counselling, and as I understood you to say, you didn't convey your true feelings. What are your thoughts about how we can find out children's real feelings and thoughts about what's happening to them?
Allowing time for those relationships, trusting relationships to form. It's not, I often hear social workers putting a time frame. I will give you 6 sessions, or we'll give you 12 sessions. Not putting a time frame on the counselling. Allowing that time. That's probably what I can.
And a part of that, I imagine, is that children at different ages, at different stages, take their own time.
Absolutely, and it's also their own processing, how they understand. There are a lot of children that have been through trauma, have issues around, their own learning difficulties. So we've got to bring it down to the level that they can manage, and that, can't happen overnight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Dyer-Kidd. I'll now ask my colleagues if there are any questions they may each have of Ms. Pickering, and may I start with you, Commissioner Gibson.
No further questions. Thank you for your great testimony.
Thank you, Ms. Alofiwai.
Thank you, Ms. Pickering. I just want to express my deepest gratitude for the courage that you've really shown in sharing your story with us this afternoon. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Judge Shaw.
Again, my thanks, but no questions. Thank you very much. And just one thing just to say, congratulations on making a real life out of a very unreal life. I think it's something that we all admire very deeply.
Dr. Erueti.
Tēnā koe te whaia, ka nui te mihi ki a koe. I just want to say thank you for having the courage and fortitude to come and speak with us. I found your evidence very compelling, and I've taken on board your aspirations and recommendations to the inquiry, and I hope we can do you justice. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Ms Pickering, there is an old saying, sometimes less is more. I adopt that and echo what's been said by my colleagues. Thank you for your valuable evidence.
Thank you.
Madam Registrar, can you proceed to bring today's sitting to an end?